Welcome to Podcast Summaries, where every week we break down powerful ideas from 8 to 10 top podcasts to help you grow, heal, and thrive while saving time. If you find this summary helpful, hit that subscribe button and check the description for direct links to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Your support keeps this journey going. James Sexton, a divorce lawyer, has worked with thousands of clients, including elite athletes and people in the financial markets, gaining valuable insights into the complexities of relationships and breakups. He notes that the world relates to divorced men and women differently, with women often being perceived as more nurturing and men being seen as more aggressive.
Sexton and Andrew Huberman delve into the topic of infidelity, which is a common factor in many divorces.
Sexton notes that people often mistake correlation for causation, assuming that infidelity is the reason for a divorce, when in fact, it's often a symptom of deeper issues. Sexton also observes that men and women react differently to infidelity, with men often expressing anger and women being more forgiving in unhappy marriages.
The conversation turns to contracts, with Andrew sharing his personal experience of creating a contract with his business partner.
Sexton notes that contracts can provide a sense of safety and security, but also acknowledges that they can be intimidating.
Sexton and Andrew discuss the contract of marriage, with Sexton pointing out that people often don't think about the term contract when getting married. However, he believes that marriage is both an economy and a contract, and that being honest about these aspects can actually strengthen relationships.
Sexton also touches on the topic of prenuptial agreements, which are often viewed as unromantic or pessimistic. However, he argues that having a prenup can actually establish a sense of safety and prevent common conflicts and misunderstandings. Sexton notes that everyone has a prenup, either one created by the state legislature or a tailored one that meets the unique needs of the couple. He believes that having a prenup can be a positive and intimate conversation that allows couples to discuss their fears, hopes, and expectations. Sexton argues that every married person has a prenup, whether it's one written by the government or one created by the couple themselves. He believes that it's better for couples to create their own rule set rather than relying on the government's rules. Sexton also thinks that the word contract can be a buzzkill, but he believes that it's a necessary part of any relationship. He argues that couples should discuss what they owe each other and what they bring to the relationship. Sexton believes that this conversation can be a beautiful and intimate one, and that it can help couples feel safe and loved. He thinks that this is because the kind of people who can have the conversations necessary to create a prenup are the kind of people who are likely to be successfully married. Sexton thinks that having a prenup can be a way to bolster the probability of a marriage working, rather than just being a way to protect one's assets. Sexton also talks about the importance of having hard conversations in a relationship. He believes that couples should discuss difficult topics, such as what would happen if they broke up or if one of them died. Sexton thinks that these conversations can be uncomfortable, but they are necessary for building a strong and healthy relationship. Sexton believes that people's attitudes towards marriage are often handed down and not thought through, even among modern and feminist individuals. For example, many women still want their fathers to walk them down the aisle and give them away, despite being successful executives in their own right. Sexton thinks that the psychological underpinnings of this behavior are rooted in a desire for internal validation and worth. Sexton notes that even successful women often take their husband's last name, and that rarely take their wife's last name. He also points out that in divorces, women often keep their ex-husband's last name because they want to have the same last name as their kids.
Andrew Huberman asks James about the divorce rate, and James replies that it's currently at 56%. He notes that this number varies by country, with Italy having the highest divorce rate and Ireland having the lowest.
Sexton attributes this to the fact that Ireland had a strong religious narrative that prohibited divorce for a long time. Sexton believes that the fascination with marriage as a fairy tale is misguided. He notes that even if people stay together for the kids or for religious reasons, it's still a significant number. Sexton thinks that the fact that love is loaned and not permanently gifted makes it more beautiful. Sexton believes that every day, a person wakes up and decides to continue being their spouse's partner, which is a conscious choice.
Andrew Huberman asks James about the numbers on first marriages with kids, and James replies that he doesn't know the exact numbers. However, he notes that the government tracks demographic information on divorces, including the grade level of each person, whether there are children, and the ages of the children.
Sexton thinks that the wedding industrial complex doesn't want people to look at the truth of divorce statistics because it takes away from the fantasy of marriage. Sexton believes that prenups can be a useful tool for couples to discuss what they mean to each other and what they owe to each other.
Andrew Huberman takes a break to talk about his sponsors, Ag1 and Our Place.
Sexton notes that contracts, including prenups, are a tool to embrace reality and enrich the positives. He thinks that marriage is about an imagined future and that contracts can help couples build a stronger relationship by discussing their goals and expectations. Sexton believes that imagination is key to building a successful marriage, and that it's not just about what happens today, but about what the future holds. Sexton thinks that people should be honest with themselves and their partner about their needs and desires, and that this conversation can actually strengthen the relationship. Sexton also believes that the idea of a soulmate is a myth, and that people should focus on building a life together rather than relying on a romantic notion. Sexton agrees and thinks that this is because people are often afraid to have the conversation about what they want and expect from each other. Sexton believes that having a prenup can actually help to prevent problems down the line, and that it's a way to take control of your own relationship. Sexton also talks about the importance of communication in relationships and how people often struggle to express their needs and desires to their partner. Sexton thinks that this is because people are often afraid of being vulnerable and that they don't know how to have the conversation. Sexton believes that having a prenup can help to facilitate this conversation and that it can actually bring couples closer together.
Andrew Huberman asks James if he thinks people are completely honest with themselves and their partner when they decide to get married.
Sexton thinks that people often don't know what they want and that they don't know how to express it. Sexton believes that this is because people are often caught up in the romance and excitement of a new relationship, and that they don't take the time to think about what they really want. Sexton also talks about the idea of love and how it's often portrayed in society. Sexton thinks that the idea of a romantic partner being your soulmate is a myth, and that people should focus on building a life together rather than relying on a romantic notion. Sexton believes that love is a fragile thing and that it requires work and effort to maintain.
Andrew Huberman points out that James has said that marriage is like the lottery and that you're probably not going to win.
Sexton explains that he means that marriage is a rare and special thing and that it requires work and effort to maintain. Sexton believes that having a prenup can help to control the downside, but that it's not a guarantee of success. Sexton thinks that the mellow times, just hanging out on the couch, are just as bonding as the romantic and exciting times. Sexton believes that having someone who sees the beauty in you and is cheering for you is one of the most important things in a relationship.
Andrew Huberman asks James if he thinks that the way we portray relationships in society is healthy.
Sexton thinks that the way we portray relationships, particularly in the media, is often unhealthy and unrealistic. Sexton believes that people should focus on building a life together rather than relying on a romantic notion. Sexton also thinks that the way we portray men and women in relationships is often stereotypical and unhealthy, and that people should strive to be more realistic and authentic in their relationship. Sexton notes that in today's society, we're constantly bombarded with curated versions of other people's lives on social media, making us feel inadequate and critical of ourselves. However, having someone who loves and accepts you can provide a sense of safety and security, allowing you to be your true self.
Andrew Huberman points out that social media plays a significant role in shaping our expectations and perceptions of relationships.
Sexton agrees, noting that social media is essentially a form of advertising that tells us we're not okay and that we need to buy or achieve something to be better. Sexton argues that this constant barrage of messages can be damaging and that it's essential to find ways to turn down the volume on this noise and focus on what truly matters in relationships.
Andrew Huberman suggests that romantic relationships can provide a sense of comfort and security, like a cocoon where we can feel safe and loved. However, he notes that introducing a smartphone into this cocoon can completely change the dynamic and create a different picture. Andrew Huberman shares a similar story about a moment when he felt loved in a past relationship, which was when his partner put an entire beaker of cream in her coffee.
Sexton emphasizes that intimacy is not just about sex, but about being able to be completely yourself with another person. Sexton notes that these moments of intimacy can be incredibly powerful, and that they're often what we cherish most in relationships. Sexton thinks it's essential to have open and honest conversations about what we love and accept about each other, even the quirks and flaws. Sexton shares an example of how a prenup can help create a framework for these conversations, allowing couples to discuss what they mean to each other, what they owe to each other, and what the benchmarks of their relationship are.
Andrew Huberman asks James to elaborate on what a prenup might look like, and James explains that it's essential to understand what happens in the absence of a contract.
Sexton uses the example of leasing a car, where both parties want the same thing, and the contract outlines the terms and contingencies. Sexton emphasizes that a prenup is not just about dividing assets, but about creating a rule set for the relationship. Sexton shares that he's seen prenups with specific requirements, such as how often to have sex, and even penalties for not meeting those requirements. The court upheld the contract despite finding it boorish and disgusting.
Andrew Huberman asks if the marriage lasted, and James reveals that it didn't.
Sexton thinks that the clause might have been a factor in the divorce, but notes that there are many rich and gorgeous matchups that don't work out. Sexton emphasizes that prenups are not just for the wealthy, and that they can be beneficial for anyone. Sexton explains that generally, assets are divided 50-50, but there are exceptions, and the court's goal is to achieve an equitable distribution. Sexton stresses that prenups are not about creating barriers to exit, but about creating a framework for the relationship. Sexton believes that having open and honest conversations about what we want and expect from each other can help preserve the best parts of the relationship. Sexton encourages couples to start these conversations early and to create a prenup that reflects their unique needs and goals.
Andrew Huberman and James discuss the cultural legitimacy of marriage and how it can provide a sense of security and stability.
Sexton notes that this can be especially important for couples who have children together. However, he also emphasizes that marriage is not the only way to achieve legitimacy, and that some couples may choose not to get married for various reasons. Sexton shares that he's seen cases where couples have lost a child, and the grief and pain have become too much for the relationship to bear. Sexton notes that divorce is not always a failure, and that sometimes it's necessary for people to move on and start anew. Sexton emphasizes that prenups can help couples navigate these difficult situations and provide a framework for their relationship, even in the face of unexpected challenges. There are circumstances where one partner may have squandered marital assets, such as through gambling or infidelity. A prenuptial agreement can help clarify what belongs to each partner and what is shared. Sexton uses the analogy of a Venn diagram to describe a healthy relationship, where each partner maintains their individuality while also sharing a common space. Sexton emphasizes the importance of having uncomfortable conversations early on in a relationship, rather than avoiding them and risking more difficult conversations in divorce court. Sexton notes that prenuptial agreements can cover a range of topics, including financial penalties for infidelity, but discourages including such clauses. The conversation turns to the topic of pets and how they can be a source of conflict in a divorce. Sexton shares an example of a couple who had a detailed pet clause in their prenuptial agreement, including provisions for veterinary decisions and what to do with the pet's remains after it passes away. Sexton explains that community property laws vary from state to state, but generally, assets acquired during the marriage are considered marital property. Sexton notes that after a certain period of time, separate property can become marital property, and that this can lead to a spike in divorce rates. Sexton notes that pain and trauma can be more memorable than pleasure, and that a rough litigation process can destroy years of positive memories. Sexton shares his own experience as a divorced person and notes that he has a good relationship with his ex-wife. Sexton emphasizes the importance of controlling the downside of a relationship and having a prenuptial agreement to avoid costly and traumatic litigation. Sexton emphasizes that a prenuptial agreement can be a valuable tool in protecting one's assets and avoiding conflict in the event of a divorce. When we portray ourselves as the hero or victim, it can create unrealistic expectations and lead to toxic anger. Instead, he suggests that we should strive to be more realistic and acknowledge our flaws and imperfections. This approach can help us build stronger, more authentic relationships. In the context of marriage and divorce, Sexton argues that it's essential to have a more nuanced understanding of each other's flaws and imperfections. Rather than idealizing our partners or ourselves, We should strive to see each other as complex, multifaceted individuals. This approach can help us build more resilient relationships that can withstand the challenges of life. Sexton also discusses the impact of social media on our relationships. Sexton believes that social media can create unrealistic expectations and promote a culture of comparison and competition. Rather than focusing on the idealized versions of relationships presented on social media, we should strive to cultivate more authentic, meaningful connections with others. The conversation also touches on the topic of romantic comedies and how they can create unrealistic expectations about relationships. Sexton argues that these movies often present a stylized, idealized version of love that is not reflective of real life. Instead, we should strive to create more realistic, nuanced portrayals of relationships that acknowledge the complexities and challenges of real life. Sexton also discusses the importance of vulnerability and bravery in relationships. Sexton believes that it's essential to be willing to take risks and be vulnerable with our partners, even if it means facing rejection or hurt. This approach can help us build more authentic, meaningful connections with others. The conversation also touches on the topic of prenuptial agreements and how they can impact relationships. Sexton argues that prenups can be a way of acknowledging the complexities and challenges of relationships, rather than trying to idealize or romanticize them. By having open and honest conversations about our expectations and boundaries, we can build stronger, more resilient relationships. By acknowledging our flaws and imperfections and striving to create more realistic, nuanced portrayals of love, we can build stronger, more meaningful connections with others. James Sexton also talks about the movie True Romance and how it portrays a more realistic, nuanced version of love. Sexton argues that the movie's portrayal of flawed, imperfect characters is more reflective of real life than the idealized versions of love presented in romantic comedies. The conversation also touches on the topic of pornography and how it can impact our relationships. Sexton argues that pornography can create unrealistic expectations and promote a culture of objectification and exploitation. Instead, we should strive to cultivate more authentic, meaningful connections with others. By acknowledging our flaws and imperfections and striving to create more realistic, nuanced portrayals of love, we can build stronger, more meaningful connections with others. James Sexton also talks about the importance of having open and honest conversations about our expectations and boundaries in relationships. Sexton argues that this approach can help us build stronger, more resilient relationships that can withstand the challenges of life. The conversation also touches on the topic of trust and how it can be impacted by social media and other forms of media. Sexton argues that social media can create a culture of distrust and skepticism, where people are afraid to reveal their true selves or be vulnerable with others. Instead, we should strive to cultivate more authentic, meaningful connections with others. By acknowledging our flaws and imperfections and striving to create more realistic, nuanced portrayals of love, main learning from video. The conversation revolves around the complexities of relationships, marriage, and divorce, with a focus on the importance of open and honest communication. James Sexton, a divorce lawyer, shares his insights on how contracts, including prenuptial agreements, can help couples navigate their relationships and build trust. He emphasizes that having a prenup is not just about dividing assets, but about creating a framework for the relationship and discussing what each partner expects from the other. The conversation also touches on the topics of infidelity, social media, and the portrayal of relationships in society. Sexton argues that having a prenup can actually deepen the connection and understanding between partners, and that it's essential to discuss what each person expects from the other and what they're afraid of. He also notes that men and women have different concerns when it comes to infidelity, and that men often prioritize making their partner happy over their own desires. Ultimately, Sexton believes that the key to a successful relationship is communication, honesty, and a willingness to work through challenges together. He encourages couples to be brave enough to have uncomfortable conversations and to share their true feelings with each other. By doing so, they can build a stronger and more resilient relationship that can withstand the ups and downs of life. Want the full 32-minute summary with deeper insights on every topic we covered? Head over to Quick Podcast Summaries on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can start with a free trial, and after that, it's just the price of a candy bar. Simple, easy, and packed with value. True.